to start off the show, we are going to be previewing tonight's Thursday night football game between the Denver Nuggets and the New Orleans Saints. Definitely a number of storylines in terms of my expectations for a great level of play. Those might not necessarily be there to an elite extent. You're talking about sort of a lot of unknowns on both sides of this. But again, I think that the storylines for this game are definitely prominent. Of course, the biggest one being Sean Payton making his return to New Orleans for the first time as an opposing coach. So that will be something interesting to keep an eye on. But in terms of the play on the field, I mean, this could be a very weird game. You have two rookie quarterbacks starting, Spencer Rattler versus Bo Nix. Ultimately, Bo Nix has been putting together some better weeks as of late. Really, the first three quarters for Nix last week against the Chargers was not very good, but put some drives together in the fourth quarter. I think that we have seen better versions of Nix in the past few weeks, or at least individual moments where it looks like he can be somebody to actually lead this Broncos offense to at least being solid in year one while their defense continues to play excellent. And then on the other side of this, you have Spencer Rattler stepping in for an injured Derek Carr. Rattler, somebody who has been a little bit of a polarizing figure since his days on the show QB1. It's been well documented, sort of some of the issues maybe he was dealing with as a leader then. And on the field, there's been a little bit of erratic behavior. You've gotten the great version of him at Oklahoma, where he was leading the Big 12. And then at South Carolina, we saw with a bad offensive line, a lot of turnover play. Ultimately, he made his first start last week, and I thought it was all right. There were a number of good things that he did. You talk about some of the throws that he was able to make on the run, and obviously he still got a little bit of that erratic nature behind him, like many rookies and young quarterbacks in general nowadays. I thought there were a number of instances where you saw him sort of bail out on a play with his legs to try and create there, as opposed to trusting his eyes and his arms. That is to be expected a little bit. Bo Nix to some degree as well, with his level of mobility as well, I don't think is too far off of that. You know, Rattler and Nix are a little bit comparable in my opinion. I do think that the overall arm talent might be higher on Spencer Rattler, but it's the decision making and the consistency a little bit more with Nix that does make him at least the idea of a franchise quarterback. But I thought Rattler showed a lot of good stuff as well, especially considering that they were down a few key targets in that game, and that is going to be the case in tonight's matchup as well, where the Saints are without their top two wide receivers in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Both of them will be unavailable for this game, meaning that the Saints are going to be running a little bit deep in terms of these receiving threats. A name to keep an eye on, in my opinion, is Bub Means, who truthfully, he wasn't even really on my radar up until last week. But Means, another rookie along with Spencer Rattler, drafted in the 5th round, and I think that it was pretty clear that there was some sort of a relationship between Rattler and Means in the team's last game against the Buccaneers, where they were, able to connect on a handful of occasions here. Trying to pull up the stats in particular for Means in this game, but he was the most targeted Saints receiver last week with 8. He finished with 5 catches for 45 yards and a touchdown. I think that considering both Means and Rattler were getting reps together with the second team all through training camp and into the season, that is a relationship that's a little bit under the radar, but one that I think could potentially have an impact on this game. It helps as well for the Saints that Pat Surtain, their star cornerback for the Broncos, he is going to be out for this game as well. So I think that there honestly are going to be opportunities between Means and Rattler to connect on some of these, and I kind of think that Bub Means is, I mean, if you're a fantasy football owner, he might be worth a flex start in this game. I understand, you're kind of banking on a lot of an unknown, but really, if you're going to play anybody in tonight's game, you are sort of getting an unknown inherently. And, I think that I wouldn't quite say this is a kitchen sink game for the Saints where they're going to throw everything at the Broncos. They are on a 4-game losing streak, though, and are playing this game at home against their what will eventually be former head coach, their former head coach now and probably a future Hall of Famer, that there are going to be emotions involved in this game. And I'm sure on the other side of this as well, with the Broncos, this is certainly a game that Sean Payton has had circled on his calendar as well to try and plan for this. So really looking at some of the keys to the game here, the Broncos defense, which has been one of the top units in the NFL, and even last week in what was a bit of a disappointing loss to the Chargers, has still been an elite group. Now, without Pat Surtain in this game, things do get a little bit more interesting in terms of how are they going to play this. We've seen young cornerback in Riley Moss step up, and he's having a pretty solid season up to this point. He's going to be asked to hold down more of a responsibility. Levi Wallace as well, who I believe was an offseason acquisition. If I'm not mistaken, he was, yes. And, he is going to be taking on a bigger role in this game as well. I still do really like this Broncos defense, and I think that it's going to be the number one key to this game, where you're talking about an inexperienced quarterback on the other end with Rattler, one that has been known in the past to make mistakes at times. He was mostly mistake-free in his first game. He did have an interception later on in that matchup, but at that point, I think that it was more so the Saints just playing from behind. You don't have to be quite as precise in those moments. Rattler did have 2 interceptions, actually. So, I think that this is a defense that's going to be able to get to him. And I would not be surprised whatsoever if the Broncos do come out in this game and try and send the heat. We looked at this a couple weeks ago. Vance Joseph has been one of the highest blitzing defensive coordinators and play callers in the NFL so far this season. So I expect that they are going to be attacking, especially as the Saints are still dealing with some injuries on the offensive line as well. Most significantly is being without their starting center in Eric McCoy, who is on injured reserve. Cesar Ruiz, I believe, has been ruled out for this game as well. So I think that the Broncos are going to have opportunities to send the heat specifically on the interior of that offensive line. And I think that they are ultimately going to throw Spencer Rattler off of his game and make things very difficult for him. So what do the Saints need to do in order to stay in this game if the Broncos defense is going to be firing on all cylinders? Well, I think that the first and foremost part of it is you have to have some semblance of a run game. And I think that their running has been a little bit inconsistent up to this point in the year. I know that if you do look at the game-by-game stat sheet, Kamara has still continued to produce for the most part for this Saints team. And it feels like to me that the running game has not been quite as effective. You look at Kamara with 40 rushing yards last week against the Buccaneers. The week prior against the Chiefs, he was held to just 26. And really, at the core of this offense, and it's a Derek Carr thing for sure, but it even does carry over to Spencer Rattler as well, is I think that a lot of this offense is built upon the idea of establishing the run and being able to benefit from play action passes off of that. And for Rattler especially, having a young quarterback back there that is going up to face one of the best defenses in the NFL, it can't all be on his shoulders. They are going to have to find a way to give him opportunities at least to sort of work around a lot of that pressure. And I do think that they're capable of it. That being said, you do look as well at that Broncos front seven, and that's really, obviously, Pat Surtain, a monster on the outside that will be missed. But I think that what's been sort of the key for this Broncos defense, taking that step that I certainly did not see from them, is having the strength of that front seven, where you have Zach Allen, who's an absolute monster on that front line. You're getting a little bit of surprising production, in my opinion. Nick Bonito has been a name that has sort of been jumping off of the tape to me in a lot of these instances as well. And that is going to have to be an area where you overcome what is a lot of size and athleticism in that Broncos front seven. I think that the Saints are capable of doing so. I think that they have, at least from an entertainment standpoint, if you are into offensive lines, the tackles that they have in rookie Taliesin Fuaga on the left side and Trevor Penning on the right side, that is a pretty impressive duo. So I think that they are going to do a good enough job of neutralizing the Jonathan Cooper's types on the outside. It's really about that center three for me. That is kind of where this offensive scheme is going to be reliant on for the Saints in this opportunity. So we'll see. I do think that this is very likely going to be a low-scoring game. We're going to double-check here what the current situation is in terms of a little bit of a betting preview here to close out this segment. The Broncos are 3-point favorites on the road, which is a bit of an interesting line to me. I do understand, like I mentioned, I'm definitely leaning with the Broncos on this one, and I think that defense is going to be a significant mismatch, especially considering the fact that the Saints don't have for this game their usual quick safety valves in an Olave and Shaheed on the perimeter. That so much of this game probably for the Saints is going to be won and lost inside that tackle box. So ultimately, I just think it's a lot of points to be laying to the Saints as a home underdog. That being said, though, I think that this is the Broncos game to lose, and I do have them coming out in this game. In terms of laying the points, I suppose I would go with the Broncos -3 if I had to pick either way. Which, I think that the Broncos win this game. Really is my ultimate takeaways on this game. I want to look at the over-under line as well to see what that's currently looking like, as it appears to be 37.5, which is in fact the lowest line for Week 7. Not a massive surprise considering that both of these offenses have looked quite pedestrian at points in this season. And I know saying that about the Saints, who have also looked elite in the first 2 weeks. So, the reality is the Saints haven't really shown that they are still that type of offense. Plus, there are just so many key missing pieces that I do think that this is the Broncos game here. I think that they come out on top, probably in a low-scoring affair. And, the Broncos, while they are continuing to fight for playoff seeding, and they seem like they might be very much in play for a wild card spot, on the other end of this thing, the Saints also are desperately trying to stay alive in a divisional hunt. So I'm going with the Broncos in this game. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as we are going to be switching gears a little bit here and diving into my top 10 teams in the NFL entering Week 7. We do this on a weekly basis, give a little bit of a power rankings. So we will be diving into that in a moment here, but before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.